When I'm walking down the street.
I do want to say to Doni and many of you in this room that over a very long career in this city, all of you have helped me and my colleagues tell the truth and to try to tell.
I may not look like you and you me, but
my head up.
I'm from South Carolina, so I just
What does this event mean to you, Miss Peggy Morris?
Oh, my heart.
Happy 20th anniversary.
My heart is about loving up on my sisters. Do you know what it feels like to have your sisters in the room? Done.
And dare to be different and unique. I'm gonna be the best me I can be by letting His glory shine through. I am beautiful, I am blessed, but not just what you see in the flesh. I'm free from people, free from myself. There's a
the doctor lived next door to the janitor, to the reverend, and the lawyer. We were together. Now we get so high and mighty that you create stress for your society because you don't like poor black folks either. That's a health problem. Get yourself together so I can stop being taking care of geriatric people and get back to pediatrics. I thank you, Doni, for all you've done. Let's keep doing it all and more.
letting His glory shine through. Dare to be you, dare to be me, dare to be different and unique. I'm gonna be the best me I can be by letting His glory shine through. And I dare you, I dare you, I dare you to be you.
First name's Doni, last name's Glover. In it to win it for the long haul, baby. All right. We're here. Get that collar right. All right. So yesterday, right now, the jury is out deliberating on the Squeegee Kid incident. Young man is charged with murder, and attorney J. Wendell Gordon and Warren Brown have taken on the case pro bono yesterday and watching Fox News. And you can go to bemorenews.com for the full editorial on the Squeegee murder. But I found it very interesting how the two noted black attorneys, Warren Brown and J. Wendell Gordon, were, you got to unmute yourself, Rich, were counterbalanced, if you will, on the news with Jeremy Eldridge and Thiru Vignaraja. Now, of course, neither Jeremy or Thiru are black. Both Warren Brown and J. Wendell Gordon are black. And you have to read the editorial, but I look at race and the role that race plays in not just the case of the Squeegee Kid, but also the role of race in Baltimore and how Baltimore is the home of segregation going back to the days of J. Barry Mahul, who is the mayor from 1907 to 1911. He is known as the father of segregation. And the editorial goes into how racism is as American as an apple pie. And until we, the people who live in America, can heal from this trauma, we will be perpetually faced with incidents like the Squeegee murder, like Trayvon Martin. You know, when they were talking about Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman and this stand your ground thing, remember George Zimmerman was stalking Trayvon Martin. He stalked him and killed him in murder. And so let's afford the Squeegee Kid. Now, he was 14 then, he's 16 now. Let's afford him the same liberties and freedoms that we afforded George Zimmerman, period. End of story. Anyway, Richard Elliott, good morning. How are you, sir?
Good morning, Doni. I'm doing well. I'm ready to talk, ready to field any questions you got for me about the ongoings in the state. Good morning, Kenneth. Good morning, Reverend Clark.
Have you followed the Squeegee Kid case at all?
So I remember when the incident happened, although you saying this was 2 years ago, that's lengthy. I know that Mr. Brown is the person defending the child in this situation, or the young man?
J. Wendell Gordon is the lead attorney. Warren Brown is his assistant in this
Okay.
case.
Yeah, I saw Warren Brown giving comment, I think, after the trial. And in the case, from all of I remember, just a guy chose to get out of the car at the intersection and attack the squeegee kid. There's no thing saying that you need to even patronize squeegee kids. You could just ignore them if you choose to. There's nothing at all saying that you are beholden to pay them, that you're beholden to respond to them, anything like that. And a lot of people outside of the city almost pretend as though squeegee kids are like a secondary tax force, that if you don't patronize them, they'll take your vehicle or something, which is just peculiar. Good morning, Mr. Hall. Just peculiar. Doesn't make any sense. And then I think the greatest tragedy of all in this is that the squeegee, people doing squeegee has been around, and not even just in Baltimore, for decades. I think I read about it happening even back in the 70s and 80s. And the same thing happened then. Somebody attacked a squeegee kid. It ended up putting the whole, I'll call it program. It's not really a program, but putting the whole opportunity at risk for everybody. And then the cycle repeated itself. It ended up, people disliking squeegee people rather than wondering why there's no jobs for children in West Baltimore.
Let me just put this out there. We need Black media.
Mm-hmm.
We need Black media, especially in instances like this. And I will tell you why. It seemingly happened every day for weeks where the squeegee kids were in the news. Fox News, Fox specifically, Baltimore Fox, 45. But they never, ever, ever talk about the white panhandlers who walk right up to your car asking people for money. I saw it just yesterday.
Yeah, the people who, when the light stops, walk down the middle lane
and walk right up to your car. They right there within a foot of you.
Yeah, one thing that I always appreciate
is that not aggressive?
I'm not gonna say that's aggressive because I have no issue with people panhandling, but that's me though. I'm not gonna complain about a squeegee kid cleaning my car or cleaning my friend's car.
That's exactly my point. Mm-hmm. They talk about the squeegee kids, but you don't see this white guy panhandling in the same way. I mean, he's not even trying to wipe your window. He just got his hand out in the Black community in an era where Trump, the Trumpster, is still a political force.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the white lady that was in my alley eating off the ground, and she said, she called me the N-word because I said, lady, you have to get out the alley. She said, do you own this alley? I said, well, by golly, I do. And I say that because I remember paying $600 for some concrete to help fix the alley. So you're damn right I own it, and you don't, and you got to go. It's so easy to point the finger. A lot of times Black people have grace and mercy. We have empathy for poor people. But that same empathy and kindness is not often reciprocated. When you look at mass incarceration in this country, African Americans comprise 13% of the population, but Black men alone comprise some 40% of the prisons. Black women are the fastest growing demographic. How can a minority be the majority in prison? Obviously, the scale is tilted.
Mm-hmm.
And so when people come at me with that privileged mindset, that privileged mentality, just like a George Zimmerman, I'm gonna call a spade. You ain't say nothing when they did it, but as soon as the Black kid did it, now George Zimmerman wasn't standing any ground. He stalked Trayvon Martin and killed him and was guilty of murder. This kid at least could say this man came wielding an aluminum bat. He walked across 8 lanes of traffic with his car still running. So he intended on batting him down and getting in his car and moving on. He tried to take justice in his own hands. which precipitated the young man to say, "Oh," and I'm not justifying the young man's actions, but they didn't go all that far with pressing George Zimmerman. How is George Zimmerman even walking? How is he even on the streets? Total miscarriage of justice.
Well, you talked about how Zimmerman, particularly, he chased Trayvon. We have a very similar trend in Maryland of there are media outlets that either A, chase the bad stories, which I'm going to say mostly is Fox 45, but I'm also going to fault the Baltimore Sun considerably on that. And you simultaneously have people who run away from the positive stories. For example, all the stories about how in Park Heights, the community center got set up and offered so much for people. And I've never read about it in a newspaper, I think, outside of your musings and what I've talked about with individuals. So there's a chase effect for the worst things. There's a scatter effect from the positive things that do happen. And the media landscape reflects so much of what people think is the reality of not just the city or the state, but, the whole country and the world. And the state of affairs with the pandemic, economic recession, ongoing crime. I don't think the crime is truthfully up in Baltimore. Perhaps it is. In Prince George's, I'm not going to say it is. Outside of like auto thefts, just the reporting on that has made people significantly more afraid of how things are. So you're never wrong, Doni, and about your steadfast support for there being Black independent media that can talk about things as they come up with detail. When the squeegee attack story happened, I only heard online and maybe read in one story about the program in the 1980s where they basically tried to, standardize it so that it would be, quote, safer for drivers, safer for squeegee kids, better for the city, and ended up failing for everybody, to my understanding. That's the kind of background we have to give in stories so people don't end up repeating loops that have already failed.
Any thoughts on Black people who get sucked in by Fox 45 to the extent that they then become non-empathetic towards their own people?
I'm not going to say it's just Fox 45 that breeds that attitude. This is an opinion, Doni. I think that of all the places I could fathom in the country, maybe New York differently, but generally speaking, I think even among the Black crowd, the Black elder crowd, the Black voters in particular in Baltimore City, there is already a very strong, like tough on crime, reactionary impulse. That's part of how Ivan Bates was elected. That's part of how a lot of different programs that people have supported over the years for mandatory minimums and for illegal gun seizures and such have gotten the political support they have. So that's to say that there's already a pretty strong, attitude towards tough on crime approaches. But no doubt the way that, for example, the Baltimore Sun covered the uprising over almost a decade ago, or the way that the Baltimore Sun covered the uprising in the 60s, have only worsened that when you use language like calling people thugs and rioters instead of, for example,
Barack Obama called the people in Baltimore thugs.
He did. And there needs to be ongoing and consistent, I'm not even gonna say criticism, but analysis of the particular ways that Obama has used his rhetoric from the time he started his campaign. You can think about how Obama opened the doors politically for some folks, which is absolutely facts and we can't argue against. But at the same time, people my age, younger than my age, who the rhetoric they heard of him was that you need to stop looking for welfare. You need to stop trying to get in the NBA, which people older than me think is, the right talk to give to people. But for people who, were taking it direct from the president, they, at least from my stand, don't appreciate you viewing Blackness and especially young Black maleness as that. And you'd be well qualified to lead the discussion on that, Doni. How did Obama criminalize with rhetoric? Not necessarily the policy, but the rhetoric in particular is where the analysis needs to happen. because people pretend the rhetoric was all positive. I don't think people know as much or pretend as much that the policy was good, particularly with the
he killed Gaddafi.
He killed Gaddafi.
Muammar Gaddafi. Gaddafi was a head of state.
And
killed him. And that's
Libya,
against international law.
Yeah, and Libya before had been, one of the most like looking at a non-inflationary, a country that had a stable economy. Libya led the world for years in a row with non-inflation. Gaddafi's Green Book guaranteed a basic standard of living for everybody in the country, regardless of race, ethnicity, gender. Libya was arguably one of the best positioned nations in the world. And Gaddafi was talking for years about an African nation, making a petrodollar, things that would have strengthened the African continent well. And now Libya has open air slave markets and has had unstable government for a decade. And then you take it to the domestic perspective, particularly of police departments getting some of the strongest reinforcements in terms of their equipment they've ever gotten. You could say that Obama implemented the long-term anti-riot plan for America by giving so many police departments their armored personnel carriers and their big black boots and their big shields and the stuff that you and me saw on the streets of Baltimore back in 2014. 2015, excuse me. But the stuff that we saw in limited capacity in Baltimore has become national stock, even for, the local police departments. So and none of this is excusing Joe Biden, but again, Donnie, from my perspective,
my God, they talk about Donald Trump. The Biden's straight gangster.
Biden is, I think, potentially even more culpable than Clinton in terms of the mass incarceration state, in terms of the high finance state, because when he was in charge of Delaware, when he was the senator from Delaware, he removed bankruptcy protection from people. But at the same time, I feel that if Biden chose to hang him up, he would be going down as a top 5 president in American history, which is just, it's a wild turn. A man that went from the mass incarceration king to arguably, maybe outside Lyndon Johnson, Ulysses S. Grant, the best ally that black folks have had as president. A lot of what Biden has done has been congratulatory, or you could say has not been with full teeth. But from my opinion, for the stage that he's set, especially after the insurrection, Joe Biden has set at least a partial precedent for what a president should do when they're facing danger. At least a partial. In the early 2 years of his presidency, when he didn't have the House, he didn't have the Senate, and actually had really low approval ratings, was able to do quite a bit just through administrative powers. But if you have criticisms for Joe, I'm not gonna tell you not to criticize Joe.
Hunter Biden and Joe were seemingly making some deals, and that's what people do. What's interesting is that when we get a black in the chief executive position, locally, statewide, nationally,
gotta be clean. Gotta be clean, or else you're in trouble.
Yeah, so it's almost like you can't push all of the buttons.
Hey, if you want to say there's a double standard and Joe Biden's son does mistakes, I think that's facts. Hunter Biden is probably not the best guy to hang out with, but at the same time, I think personally that Hunter's indiscretions have softened Joe's heart even a little bit. This is the same guy who in 94 was arguing for lock up anybody with drugs. And in a presidential debate.
But see, that's a double standard too, because the pharmaceutical companies are the biggest drug dealers in the world. And
no question.
Look at the drugs that they push on, particularly our seniors.
The Sackler family is international criminals.
Without remorse.
And all they had to do to get out of them, putting America into, I would say, probably its deepest on the whole body addiction crisis. I think that you could argue that crack impacted the black community in such a particular way, but what's happened with opioids and how it has put so many people, young people, old people, people regardless of race, people regardless of class, into an addiction process that is among the worst from everything I've read and heard about opioid and heroin addiction.
Fentanyl comes straight out of China.
I think this is my opinion. I think the fentanyl that's entering Maryland is coming from competing drug dealers in other states, because it went from fentanyls in heroin to where you're using it as like a filler, so you're not paying for as much, to people putting it in opioids so they could have stronger effect, to now people are finding them in cannabis. Like, and that is, I personally think, people trying to negatively impact their competing consumer base when it gets to a certain point.
Any thoughts on China?
Any thoughts on China? China is much better positioned than the United States for a lot of the 21st century. China has been spending their money on, you could call them soft imperial projects of building dams, of building bridges, of adding internet, of building tangible products for people in Asia, in Africa, in other parts of the world. And I argued to a friend just yesterday, matter of fact, the United States, whether I like Uncle Sam or not, has military bases in like 120 countries in the world. China, in the next 10 years, is probably going to have a bridge, a dam, internet connection, something along those lines they own in 50, 60, 70 countries around the world. And just, we have to pay, me, you, the American citizens are paying for the maintenance of Uncle Sam's structure. The people of the other countries are paying for China's soft imperial process, and it is actually giving some tangible benefit to people. China, however, is in demographic decline. China, because of their one-child policy and attitudes towards young children that are girls being born, China is going to have a long-term structural deficit in terms of the number of people in the country. China is not, unless there is massive immigration, ever going to have more people in the country than they do today. America is only going to keep growing because America is reliant upon immigrants. China, Japan as well, Korea sort of as well, are much more reliant on interior birth. This is particularly important with one thing in mind that will impact all Americans, all people very much. You know what that is, Donnie?
What's that?
Superconductors. Taiwan, China's mortal enemy, is the #1 country in the world for superconductors, even though it's smaller than a lot of states. With the pandemic and supply chain issues, there is now much more domestic manufacture of these superconductors. If and when China chooses to invade Taiwan, which people have predicted might happen in the next few years or won't happen at all, the cost of electronics, the cost of gaming, the cost of TV production is going to hit all-time highs. That is a major, major thing to keep on the radars of anybody, regardless of what you think about China, Taiwan, or superconductors.
Have you ever read John Naisbitt's Megatrends or Megatrends 2000?
I have not, but I've probably just heard opinions from people that have heard it. I'd like to hear your opinion from somebody that's read it, I'm assuming.
Well, 25 years or so ago, he pointed to the Southeast Pacific Basin as the new center of the world, Southeast Asia, as the most dominant area in the world.
So I would have been 5 when that book came out. I read the one that came out about 2010 or so, about how every 20 years there's a grand epoch in history that makes it seem like stuff can't change. 1940, you look at the world, it looks like Nazi Germany is probably going to take over all of Europe. You go forward another 20 years, it looks like probably the Russians are going to win the Cold War. You go forward another 20 years, it looks like America and Russia are in a stalemate. You go forward another 20 years, 2000. The year 2000 might have been the best year ever for America, arguably. That late 90s period going up to 2000 is probably if you care about black folks, is probably in the golden age for America, probably.
Mhm.
But then you go to 2001, and a couple of planes later, and the United States decides to go into the stupidest, worst, hardest to win, and most globalized war that it could have ever faced. And undoubtedly, anybody that says the U.S. has won the war on terror is a liar or sells their own books. So, looking at what I think of the future from what I see now, America was hit terribly by COVID. You look in about maybe 15 years and how our hospitals, how our insurance, how our economy will be impacted by people whose lungs give out on them because they had COVID once or twice or thrice, or had COVID with no vaccine. China has done much better on COVID response. Looking at energy consumption, I think that China is probably going to have a better transition into solar energy because there aren't huge domestic industries in China that focus on fossil fuel consumption. I think that China is also, without a doubt, going to have better relationships in a lot of Africa, in a lot of Eastern Europe, and a lot of Asia as Russia's influence dwindles in the coming years. These are personal opinions, though.
I want to shift gears a bit. I want you to talk about your story on Tommy Broadwater.
Absolutely. So thank you for giving me the platform to talk on this. Rest in peace to the first African-American senator from Prince George's County. Senator Broadwater is a unique, complex, deeply interesting individual. He first was elected in 1974 to the state Senate. 4 years prior, he was elected to the Prince George's County Central Committee. At that time, Prince George's was highly rural, with black folks mostly in the inner beltway areas like Fairmount Heights, which is, I believe, where Mr. Broadwater was originally from and where a lot of the outgrowth of support for him in his passing has come from. Tommy Broadwater got elected in 1974. He beat a black delegate who was very NAACP affiliated named Arthur King. Both of them were elected in the 24th Legislative District where I currently live. Mr. Broadwater was primarily known for what he was able to do on the political, not the policy side. So what did he do? He helped people get jobs. He helped people get appointments. He helped people understand how you could get elected. And probably most important for the long term, he helped people get onto the slate. In my county, where houses are not as dense as in Baltimore, it is prohibitive to run a field campaign. I visited almost every door in my district, and even that only got me about 5,000 votes for Central Committee and 2,000 or so votes for delegate. Mr. Broadwater found out that you could get on the ticket, the slate, the sample ballot, where your literature, information about you, is automatically sent to every voter. This has been the predominant means of virtually every official, from our congressman, our county executive, down to the bottom of the Central Committee and the judges of the Orphans Court, getting elected. In 1983, Mr. Broadwater, Senator Broadwater, was unfortunately arrested for food stamp fraud in what I believe was an FBI sting, where he was going to cash in several $1,000s worth of food stamps for money at a grocery store that he owned. He went to prison. He lost his Senate seat. He came back and tried to run multiple times for his seat, and he didn't win. But what he did do, he became a multimillionaire. He owned the Ebony Inn. He owned a rib shack. He owned a bail bonds business, Bondwater Bail Bonds. And there is even a mansion, the Broadwater Estate, that is on the side of the highway in Upper Marlboro. It's like the only house for miles. That is his family home. So Mr. Broadwater has an incredible legacy, and he's going to be having a celebration of life, I believe, in early August at the First Baptist Church of Glenarden.
August 1st.
August 1st. And you can tune in live, or if you want to come pay your condolences, I believe the family would be very heartened to hear from people who, Tommy got me my first job. Tommy helped me help my cousin get an appointment. Tommy came to my town and helped us get something. And for all the elected officials under him, regardless of what I said about the sample ballots, everybody owes him a debt of gratitude because he was the first. He undoubtedly had to face slings and arrows when there was not a black caucus of size when now Maryland has the biggest black caucus by black membership. In Georgia, they say theirs is biggest, but that's because they have white associate members. By black members, Maryland has the largest black caucus in the country.
Richard, I think I should tell you that on August the 10th, Be More News will be having a birthday party. We turned 21.
Y'all are almost as old as me. Where's the celebration going to be? I missed the one at BWI.
It's going to be at Collins Seafood. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to put together a promo as we speak on that. But 21 years of the black media. Richard, tell me about the other publications besides Be More News and BlackUSA.News that you contribute to.
Sure. So Be More News, Black USA News are holding it down very well for Baltimore, keeping me and lots of people informed about goings on in Charm City. I'm a writer with the Washington Informer, based primarily in Washington, D.C., but I also cover Prince George's, state affairs, and I've lately been covering more Southern Maryland news. Washington Informer is the largest black-owned paper in the D.C. area, and with the demise of a lot of local news sources, along with the Afro fading back from their print edition, it is even more important than ever before. I know the Afro got their new building, but I think that they're preparing for their resurgence right now. Whereas like you've been on the march all pandemic. You've been live every week, all pandemic, giving people not just your opinion, but different guests. And I think that's essential.
Why?
Why is it essential that different guests? Our state has a lot of different opinions. I told you, I think Baltimore has lots of tough on crime people. My opinions don't necessarily reflect the opinion of a 70-year-old black grandma from Ednor Gardens, or from Patterson Park, or from Plantation Park Heights, or from wherever else in the city, even though I lived in the city. So getting the opinion of people of different ages, different opinions, different ideologies, and just different stages of life. I've never had to be a homeowner yet, worrying about if somebody breaks my window.
Really?
Not yet. Not yet. I just was an apartment dweller up there worrying about if the rats were going to get in.
When you lived in Baltimore?
Yep. And for anybody listening, I'm not lowering the city a notch at all. I recommend everybody in Maryland live in Baltimore for at least a couple of months so you can get good food, meet the best people, and bump into people twice in the same day on accident.
So, Richard, tell me about how Tommy, in your reporting, whom did he influence? Did he influence every politician who came about in Prince George's County, everybody who came after him?
So there's, to open this, there's very, very limited reporting news history on this, where I'm talking about almost a black hole in our history that needs to be filled in. And I think that Senator Broadwater's funeral is going to help to showcase a lot of that, because he's going to have a state funeral in many ways, especially in the black community. What did he do? So when now Congressman Hoyer, he had been the senator in that area prior, and then there was redistricting when they redid. Prior to that, Maryland did not have proportional representation. Some people's Senate districts had 2 or 3 times as many people as some of the rural ones. When they redid that with a court decision, Hoyer had changed districts. Hoyer eventually became the Senate president. When Hoyer was Senate president, prior to Miller becoming Senate president, that's when Broadwater entered the Senate. Hoyer and Broadwater were very, very close. In fact, Hoyer gave, I would say, a rather beautiful eulogy, or rather beautiful condolences to the family from his official page regarding Broadwater. Now, while I have a negative opinion of Steny, particularly for his impact on causing the Iraq War and really on being a moderating force in the National Democratic Party, for local African Americans who are ages 70 and up, Steny Hoyer was their first white friend in the legislature, pretty much. Hoyer, Miller, a lot of those folks, while they were kind of segregationists in a way, they were also, from the view of a lot of the local poor blacks, arguing for them to have their own neighborhoods. The middle-class black folk like myself have always disliked Hoyer and Miller because they wanted to move out our schools, but at the same time was sort of guaranteeing that there were schools inside the Beltway. And now, the way that we've desegregated in the county, there are still poor schools in the Beltway, but if you chose to, like many of my county men have done, you can go to whatever school you want in Prince George's. You could live in Brandywine and attend Eleanor Roosevelt High School if you wanted to, even though they're probably an hour and some change apart. So Broadwater, he developed an allies with then Senator Hoyer, then Senator Miller. He helped to guide a lot of the younger politicians. I'm sure that if Ulysses Curry was still alive, he would talk about his mentorship. I'm sure that a lot of the legislators that came in under him not only have not been serving, but are no longer with us. And in fact, his legacy now goes to the newest generations of legislators who saw their mentors mentored by him. Delegate Nick Charles, the chair of the county delegation, wrote about this in posts with Senator Broadwater.
Richard, I want to now ask you about the U.S. Senate race. David Trone, largest liquor and wine distributorship in America, who has a reputation for using his money to win elections. There's a person, a black man on the Montgomery County Council who's running.
Yes, Will Jawando, who, just to be honest and straightforward about I would estimate that he's at about 10% of the vote. He has raised spectacularly. He raised about $500,000 in his opening quarter, you could say. But that's with Alsobrooks raising about $1.75 million. And I believe that Trone gave himself at least $4 million, at least. So it's an uphill battle. And if I were to give my opinion on the race right now, Angela Alsobrooks has most likely sewn up the race through a wide coalition of establishment support, not dissimilar from Governor Moore.
So you say if the election were today, you think Alsobrooks would win?
Absolutely. If the election was today, the real question that is of interest to me is how or why or when does Trone go negative? Trone spent, I think it was $250,000 in Western Maryland to go negative on former Governor O'Malley's wife when Anthony Brown was running against her for Attorney General. And congratulations, Attorney General Brown. I think you're doing great work in your job. And I think that you're the most steadfast of the statewide officials right now on some of my issues. Now, one second. Let me get my brain back. Alsobrooks has the money to where she can go positive. She can talk about her candidacy. She can raise her name recognition. But Trone could, if he chose to, outspend basically the same amount of money that she's spending to go positive on herself, to go negative. Or if not to go negative, to ask questions about things such as development in Prince George's County, her opinion and positions on returning citizens, on her tenure as the state's attorney, on her positions on education. So far, the race has been much like the governor's race, has been a good feel. I like Angela for who she is, with relatively little description of her accomplishments. I'll say that again. This has been a feel-good campaign so far for the most part, with little description of her accomplishments.
Richard, I want to tell you what I've seen.
Oh, go for it. I'm a mute to listen as well, so I don't cut in.
We have not seen any of them in Baltimore. Baltimore is the media hub of the state. None of the candidates have made their presence in Baltimore. I haven't seen them in local media. We haven't heard of them at community meetings. We haven't heard of them visiting any churches, synagogues, or mosques. To me, considering that Trone, and I've heard it multiple times, they say he has more money than God. Of course, pun intended. Well, what have you. Angela doesn't have that kind of money. She's not going to beat him in the financial piece. C. Anthony Muse ran for U.S. Senate. We saw him in Baltimore. In hindsight, we didn't see him enough in Baltimore. And he has Baltimore roots. But many years later, after he left Baltimore, nobody knew him. To me, Alsobrooks should be in Baltimore every weekend. Sure, she has a 9-to-5, but I think she should be in Baltimore at least twice a week. And I don't think she can afford to wait until the clock gets down to the fourth quarter to make her presence felt. I don't think she can afford it. There should be rallies now.
I spoke with probably the best person to ask about how to run a black Senate race in Maryland at her launch, and that was Senator Mfume, or excuse me, Congressman Mfume. And Congressman Mfume emphasized, you need to work, you need to get out and meet everybody that you know needs to work for you. Miss C, like I said, for Alsobrooks, as soon as folks start talking about the accomplishments, the race is going to take a different tenure, because right now it is mostly, I trust her, I respect her, I think that she's got good opinions, I know that she'll fight for issues in Congress that, to be honest, any Democrat that gets elected from Maryland is going to support. No Maryland senator that's a Democrat is going to oppose reproductive rights. No Maryland senator that's a Democrat is going to oppose, a lot of what the governor is doing. So to say that one would be a great ally to the governor or a great ally in reproductive rights, you're going to be a Democrat in the Senate. That is my personal opinion. Now, to go beyond these things and to go back to what you said, I think that the race is going to be determined in the northwest Baltimore County area. I think that the area stretching from roughly the area of Pikesville, Randallstown, Owings Mills, northwest Baltimore City is going to determine the race. And here's why I think that. David Trone should, in theory, run Saudi Arabia numbers in Northwest, in Cheswold, and among the Orthodox Jewish folks. I'm assuming that he's going to run extremely strong numbers among those folks, because that group voted very strongly for Francho. That group voted very strongly for Hogan. Orthodox Jews do not vote for black folks unless they need to. That is my personal opinion. I don't have any data to back it up. But in the Randallstown, Owings Mills area, there's a very interesting dynamic at play. The speaker represents a lot of those areas. The speaker, in theory's endorsement, should get you elected in a lot of those areas. But you look at, for example, Corey Johnson and Ruben Amaya, and even there's another person there his last name I think was Johnson, who wasn't even really a candidate, who ended up with several thousand votes. There are a lot of voters in Northwest Baltimore County that vote differently than the speaker's opinion, and in fact, vote against the speaker's opinion rather directly. And then you go a little bit further south in Baltimore County to the Catonsville, Arbutus, Halethorpe areas. There's a lot more young, progressive, whiter folks there. Ian Miller represents that area on the Central Committee. Ian Miller, I believe, wants to support Will Jawando, because Will Jawando, of the three candidates, has the most progressive legislation that he's supported and been able to get through. For example, the rent stabilization in Montgomery County, Will Jawando supported, whereas in Prince George's County, Angela Alsobrooks took active steps to short walk the rent stabilization measures. She didn't oppose them per se, but she took efforts to slow walk them so they'd be harder to implement. If Will Jawando is able to get into Northwest Baltimore County, Southwest Baltimore County, West Baltimore City, I think there's a lot of ground for him to gain there. I think that for Alsobrooks, she definitely needs to get into the city. I would say probably in the northern part of the city first, because there, a lot of people not only don't know her, but are going to have a lot of questions about why they should support her. I think that in East Baltimore, there's going to be more people who rely on the McRae machine, not necessarily to make their mind up, but to get the vote out, but to raise the turnout. And in West Baltimore, the Hayes machine is simultaneously going to raise the turnout. I don't know whether Hayes and McRae are going to support Alsobrooks, Trone, or Jawando. I personally don't know. But from what I saw in past elections, I have never seen Angela Alsobrooks personally, or Trone for that matter, do anything that supports Trone or Jawando. And from everything I've ever seen regarding Hayes and McRae, who probably from their individual vote operations control the most votes in the state by turnout numbers, if David Trone is wise, he's going to get in there and see what he can do to at least keep them from getting on with Jawando or Alsobrooks.
Any thoughts on Aisha Braveboy becoming the next county executive of Prince George's?
Great question. So if let's assume that that Alsobrooks is elected and Alsobrooks chooses to stay in the position to the last day, the county council will do the appointing in that situation. However, in the case of a council appointment, I believe Aisha Braveboy would become the county executive. However, if Angela Alsobrooks resigns her position prior to like late November, mid-November, I don't have the exact date, but if she resigns her position with more than 90 days before the next election,
a county executive will be appointed.
A county executive would be special elected by the people of Prince George's County. There was a special election in District 8 where Edward Burroughs won resoundingly. There was a special election in District 6 when county executive, what is his name? He went to county executive Jack Johnson's wife was serving on the county council. She had to resign because she got in trouble as well. There was a special election there. That's how Derek Leon Davis joined the county council. If there were to be a special election, all bets are off. Anybody could run. I could run. You could run. Everybody could run. And with a possible 20-plus candidate race, anything could happen, Donnie, anything. I think that the front runners in such a special election are definitely, the front runners in such a special election are undoubtedly State's Attorney Aisha Braveboy, County at-large Mel Franklin, County at-large Calvin Hawkins. Those are by far the three front runners. And this is another opinion. Since the new council majority has formed, Councilman Hawkins, who used to be the council chair, has less fundraising, less vote poll, less support. Franklin has almost none, to be honest. Whereas State's Attorney Braveboy, she has made considerable inroads with a lot of the municipal folks. And in a special election where every municipality could theoretically have a poll site, Aisha, State's Attorney Braveboy, she could point and say, hey, can you cover Morningside? Can you cover Seat Pleasant? Can you cover Oxon Hill? Much better than a lot of the others could. So, to go back to something I want to, give her more props for. When Alsobrooks was State's Attorney, there were no programs for returning citizens, almost none. With Braveboy as State's Attorney, I have met groups of older men who she has helped to get out, who are now mentoring younger men who have been put in positions where they're on, where they're potentially in trouble. Alonzo Turner Bay, if you're listening, Turner Bay, Alonzo Turner Bay has been one of her biggest acolytes. Why didn't Senator Carter support Mfume for Senate? That's a good question. I think that Mfume would actually be going into the U.S. Senate as an outstanding voice for all of Maryland. He'd do one term. A lot of the people in the Senate, he served with them in the House. I think that Mfume would have been my ideal pick for the U.S. Senate to represent Black interests in D.C. So why didn't Senator Cardin support him? I don't think Senator Cardin wants to support anybody because it implies that he's not leaving by his own volition.
I want to ask you something philosophical.
Sure.
Why don't we pass the ball to the younger generation?
We like to keep our jobs. We love to keep our jobs. And the longer that you...
Let me finish.
Mhm.
Mark Morial has been at the National Urban League, what, 20 years? I look at some of our HBCUs. I see a lot of us tend to overstay our welcome. Why don't we pass the ball to the younger generation? Al Sharpton, National Action Network. At some point, are you going to like get a new person to run it? What is it about us that we don't pass the ball?
All right, so
this guy's really going in on also Brooks. Has some explaining to Brooks. She has to go. When Nika Fisher's looking at state's attorney, they're trying now to appoint who they want as county executive instead of we the people. But I look at even our institutions, our Black colleges. We have people who have overstayed their welcome. And a lot of times we still have the mentality, I have mine, you have yours to get. Not always the case. What is it about us and our Black institutions? I look at, some of the local civil rights organizations. And it's like we get into these, whether it's, the Urban League, the NAACP, or just straight politics. Why in the hell do we think we're supposed to stay there forever? Like, no, I mean, don't we trust the next generation? What do you think, Richard?
The answers aren't happy, but I think number one, economic precarity. Economic precarity overrules everything in America. I think that I speak for basically everybody Black. Once you get a good job, you do everything you can to keep it more than anything else. Because having a good, stable, well-paying, like your coworker's job is not the easiest thing to get in America. So people love to keep their jobs. But I think the unfortunate side effect of that is that while some people gain outrageous amounts of tenure, it is almost impossible for people who will become leaders in the future to get the kind of training wheels they need in advance. Being a mentee for 20 years is not the equivalent of being a leader for 2. There's definitely a mindset of being comfortable with everybody around you, knowing everybody that's around you, knowing everything that's going on. But I think that it is by far the most key part of it is economic precarity. There's also a difference of people in those leadership positions don't necessarily have I'm just going to say credentials. I'm not saying abilities. I'm just saying credentials. The stuff on the resume that makes you pop off the page. You've met me, Doni. I'm not going to say I'm the most impressive person, but if you saw my resume, you might hire me on the spot for a wide variety of things, depending on the position. If you have a person whose main appeal is that they know the ins and out of a neighborhood in Baltimore, of a particular city government agency, those really specialized knowledges that aren't written down, it's very hard to replace people in those spots. So like you're talking about community association presidents, civil rights organizations, advocacy. I mean, the Democratic Party, not just elected officials, but the actual leadership. Like the people in charge, like the party chair and such. People are afraid if they pass the ball that they're never going to know where the ball is. They're never going to be able to direct the offense again. They're never going to know how to play defense again. So they know that if they stay on the court, to use that, if they keep their 5 on the court, they know everything. Even if that everything is only 25% of what is needed to be known.
Richard, we have 5 minutes left. Is there anything that we haven't covered that you'd like to touch?
I'd like to hear from you within your comfortability about how you think that the mayor is doing and about how you think the city council president race is shaping up.
I wasn't expecting that. I can tell you this. When it comes to squeegee kids, and I wrote this in an editorial on, I believe, Sunday, Mayor Brandon Scott has done more outreach to the squeegee kids than any previous mayor. Now, his support of safe streets raises questions, because for me, the emphasis put on safe streets, the energy, the bandwidth, to me, it should be put on recruiting more police officers. We're 500 officers short. So that means you have an overworked and demoralized police force. I will tell you that I see them getting out of their cars at one of the hottest corners in West Baltimore. That's Pennsylvania and Lawrence.
Mm-hmm.
I see them standing with the young people. And I can tell you that as troubling as it is to see our young people stand on Pennsylvania Avenue and Lawrence all day, every day. Just yesterday, I saw the cops standing right there with them, and I see that often. I also see, however, cops sitting across the street from where the young people are in their cars and not getting out of their cars. And I think it all goes back to Freddie Gray, where Marilyn Mosby charged officers. She did something unprecedented, and it changed the way policing has been done in Baltimore forever, especially when you think of the implementation of the DOJ's consent decree. But I would be putting that energy on recruiting more cops for Baltimore, for the Baltimore Police Department. When the Brooklyn incident went down, I do not agree with Fox. Fox has been all over the safe streets, as if safe streets, you expect these people to get in the front, to block a bullet, to get in front of a bullet. I mean, come on, man. You paying me, what, $15 an hour? You want me to go out there and put my life on the line to catch a bullet? That's unrealistic. It's unrealistic to think that the OGs want to be in harm's way. We need police. When the Brooklyn incident went down with 28 people shot, 2 people killed, that's a police matter. It's a gross failure of the Baltimore Police Department, period, end of story. And why Fox wants to throw safe streets under the bus, I just think it's utterly ridiculous. I will say, finally, that the mayor's relationship with Baltimore Gas and Electric raises questions. And I will add that the arrest of the 3 white women who were protesting what has been inferred by the judge as illegal, Mayor Scott is going to have that as a problem with re-election. They're going to remind him. I don't know how he will fare. I don't have a crystal ball. But between the 3 white women getting arrested in Federal Hill and the whites who were saying that they weren't going to pay taxes down in Fells Point,
I remember that.
He may have some challenges. From the Black community's perspective, what is interesting, the older Black perspective versus the younger Black perspective when it comes to Mayor Scott and having a child with this woman, Hannah. The young people don't give a rat's bottom as to whether or not he's married. The older folk think he should be held to a higher standard, that he should be better reflective of our African American tradition of excellence. And I'll stop there.
As a bastard child myself, I'm not going to say that it's the worst thing in the world. It's not an insult word to me. There's definitely, no question, a wide gap in opinion on Scott between the younger and the older crowd. When I was there, particularly during the election, a lot of and especially right after the election, with me as I originally was going to support Mary Washington. And by the time the race ended, I supported Sheila Dixon. I had a Sheila Dixon sign in my yard in Hamden, probably the only one there ever was. I'll tell
you this, we like people who walk these streets. And of all of the candidates, none of them know these streets better than Sheila Dixon.
Right.
Walk these streets fearlessly. And I have friends who live outside of Baltimore, and because they don't understand Baltimore, the dirt bikes, the gunshots, those of us who live here have become accustomed to it. Not that it's normal. It's very abnormal. What's even more abnormal to me is the money that some of us spend on fireworks, when clearly that money could be better spent on tuition or something productive other than some damn fireworks on the 4th of July. It's like, so we all have to make better decisions for our health, for our mental health and peace of mind, for our communities. I tell you this, we cannot afford to be afraid of our young people. That we cannot afford, because one, they sense the fear. Just give them respect. I don't care where you go in Baltimore, give respect and you'll get respect anywhere. It's just like any other part of the world. Give respect, you get respect. You don't understand something, shut your mouth until you do understand it. I will also say that despite the young people who stand on the corners, the shootings are typically from transients. Somebody coming from East Baltimore over to West over to East. Not the people not going to shoot people in their own neighborhood. It's usually somebody being transient coming through. So the world is changing. Policing is changing. Politicians, to me, spend too much time taking Instagram photos.
You don't like the future?
Do the damn work. Why are you taking so many damn selfies? Do the damn work.
There is an important thing to pay attention to for the long future of politics. There is a difference between being visible, being accessible, and being representative. And I think that the rise
say that one more time.
There's a difference between being visible, being seen in the community and respected for your works, being accessible. I can reach out to you and you answer the phone or respond to the need, and simply being representative. Whether we see you or not, we know you're working for. Bring
back some damn money for the community. You look at Baltimore. Let me tell you what really blows my mind. All of this attention has been put on the harbor, and the harbor is dead. They starve East Baltimore. They starve West Baltimore. They dump all of the money downtown. Charity starts at home. Fix your home. Take care of your home. Take care of your people. And your people will take care of you. But what we have, here's a silent movement underway in Baltimore. These damn bike lanes. You got a street that has gone from 3 lanes of traffic down to 1 because some Einstein, not from the Black community, thinks it is their job to push lowering the carbon footprint onto the Black community. We're trying to get home just like you. When you go up 95 in the Hartford County, they got 5-6 lanes of traffic and people driving 80, 90 miles an hour. Nobody talks about the carbon footprint over there. But in Baltimore City, they want to put a bike lane on North Avenue, and ain't nobody riding no damn bike. If you have children, if you have parents that you have to take care of, these bike lanes, oh my God, they impede on your time. Unnecessary bottlenecks because some idiot in transportation and planning who has no regard for black people are just as racist as J. Barry Mahul, the father of segregation, and they think it's okay.
And at the same time, the red line is being talked about being downgraded to a bus line or a partial rail line.
Baltimore has the dumbest mass transportation system in the world. Subway system that goes from Johns Hopkins to Owens Mills. At around the same time, Atlanta was building their MARTA system. They had a north-south leg and an east-west leg. So it looked like this. And that's egalitarian. It serves the whole area.
Baltimore is shaped like a swastika. It goes northwest, southeast. I'm not wrong. I've only used the subway once, and it was confusing as hell.
How was it confusing? You only got one damn line. You can't get lost.
They didn't say how often the trains come.
Now they do. They have signs up that let you know they come every 9 minutes.
And Kenneth Clark is talking about this in the captions, and I quote, Prince George's County is the same thing. Photo op public officials can't get their attention. They get called out via social media. There is, without a doubt, a rise in people who think that because they're in your feed, that I mean, I'm not even saying that you shouldn't post stuff, but people think that because the stuff is more visible, that people are able to accomplish. And a lot of the way Annapolis is structured right now, it's going to be very, very hard. I got one last question for you, Donnie. What do you think about the new police commissioner versus the old police commissioner? I'm no fan of police commissioners, but I thought the last guy was probably doing about as decent as you could in the city, to be perfectly honest.
I think they paid him way too much. And the unfortunate part is he was paid to do a job that most of us did not pay attention to. His job was what? To implement the consent decree.
Mm-hmm.
That was his job. Not the lower crime, not the lower murders, none of that. To implement the consent decree. From the indications that I've seen, he did his job.
Mm-hmm.
And he was handcuffed. The consent decree handcuffs a police commissioner. Because what the people want is for criminals to go to jail. People who are wreaking havoc, we want them gone. And since Freddie Gray, it's just been lawlessness.
Well, Donnie, this is a promise for you. Can you put together a panel just for, because I've heard on the consent decree, including even from left-leaning perspectives, that the consent decree has basically not just changed the parameters of policing, but makes it so like there's weird check-in processes, and it's not about reducing crime. I've heard that numerous times.
If you give somebody an additional 10 tasks to do on top of what they already have, you've not made it better. I think you have too much bureaucracy. Let a cop be a cop. Now, the consent decree has these cops taking a knee because the mindset is if we go out there and do our jobs, we could get sued, we could get arrested. And so you're not going to have the most enthusiastic cops under those conditions. When it comes to Worley, damn, I mean, he got sucker punched as soon as he got on the job with this mass shooting. This is the largest mass shooting that ever took place in Baltimore. He admitted that the police department failed, but somebody had to know. There were 1,000 people out there.
Right. You can't have
and there are cameras all over the place. And we've not seen anybody get charged. How do you not solve 2 murders when you have 1,000 witnesses? How inept is that? I'm not a detective. Sure, I watched a bunch of detective shows, but I know you take $1,000 out there, you identify 20 people who were there. Hey, I got some money. I got 5,000. Who did the shooting? We don't see black crime crimes committed against black people solved with the same level of enthusiasm as, say, a white Johns Hopkins professor. So Baltimore is still stuck with the innate racism. Final comment. Law has to be changed in order for policing to be changed, no matter who is in position. You know, we like Worley. It's always nice to have a homeboy, someone who loves Baltimore, who understands Baltimore. Black or white, they get tired. They get tired of the minutia that they have to navigate through just to do their jobs. I think more of our politicians need to do ride-alongs. More of our politicians need to visit the jails. Mass incarceration is a huge impediment in the black community. It impacts everybody, the whole family. Financially, politically, culturally, socially, mentally, physically. Mass incarceration is a huge problem. Black people star in this prison industrial complex, and we have to find creative ways to reverse the trend. Richard, we're going to get out of here. We went 11 minutes over. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. How can people get in touch with you?
So you can follow my writings at Washington Informer. I also write with the Baynet Southern Maryland News. This year, if you care about the Washington Wizards, pay attention to Washington Informer, Baynet News. I'll be covering the whole rebuild, and I will, without a doubt, be back with Baltimore's own Donnie Glover to talk about not just the city of Baltimore, but ongoings in the state and in Prince George's County. Thank y'all for tuning in this morning.
Are we going to see you on August 10th for the 21st birthday party?
I will make my damnedest effort to be there. If it's in my calendar, I'll probably be there. I might even bring a guest.
Good stuff. Richard, we are so proud of you, not for your academics, but for the application of your academic studies. It's one thing to go to school. It's another thing to apply it.
Wouldn't be as good a writer as I am without you, Donnie. And time to keep getting better, right?
The more you do it, the better you get. That's what Nikki Giovanni told me. Stay at it. Keep writing.
You got it, sir. All right, y'all have a good day.
Good morning, world.